Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How are you? All right, well, you lucked out today because we're going to talk about validation, and this is one of the most popular skills in DBT. So over the years, I've seen people go through DBT programs, and one of the skills that always floats to the surface that they remember is validation, right? It goes all the way through DBT. It's often talked about in groups. Even when this module isn't just being discussed, it's just like part of the conversation. And it's just so helpful that I'm glad to be able to share it with you today. All right, so we're going to go over everything validation, everything you ever wanted to know. All right, and validation is was seen in the give skill. It's the V of give in interpersonal effectiveness, and give is about keeping a good relationship. And in my give video, there's a portion where we had a brief discussion about validation. However, in this one, we're going to go in a much deeper and more, elaborate way. Okay, so you'll get to know a whole lot more when you listen into this one. All right, so this is part of the Walking the Middle Path module. All right, so this one has three main goals. So one is about recognizing dialectics and dialectical dilemmas as they come up, and to learn to think more dialectically, which is kind of like taking both sides of an issue into account, coming to a higher conclusion and a truth by considering different sides of the story. Today, we're going to focus on working on validation. Validation and radical acceptance are very similar, but there's a whole other video on radical acceptance, so I'm mostly going to do validation today. So the opposite end of that dialectic is validation or acceptance, and on the other side, change. So while you accept things the way they are and accept someone fully as a human being, you could also recognize that it's possible to change and make things even better. Okay, so there's going to be other videos about change, but today we're going to, again, do some validation. A cute picture, right? I kind of liked it. All right, so validation includes three major things, okay? And they're different levels of relating to another person's experience. So on the one hand, they talk about resonance, right? So think about like a tuning fork. If you ring one tuning fork and hold another tuning fork nearby, the second one starts to vibrate. So we have these things in our brain called mirror neurons. So when someone is feeling something, let's say I have a friend and she's feeling really sad. When I go near her, my mirror neurons start firing because my brain can pick up her emotions. And so I end up feeling a little bit of what she's feeling. So on a physiological level, my brain is responding. And I start to feel the vibes in a way, right? It's kind of like physically sensing something. Like, ever walk into a room and you can feel the mood of the room? Like, you know that there's something not right going on, or people are a little upset, and you didn't hear a word of what they were saying, but you could just sense it. All right, so that's resonance, okay? So when we're trying to validate something, part of it is we have to feel a little bit of what they're feeling on a physical level, okay? Next is what they call attunement. So when you attune to somebody, you're consciously tuning into your inner experiences and reading the meaning of what those signals mean. So this has to do with a skill called interoception, which is like sensing your body from the inside. So if I feel my emotions from the inside, I might be sensing muscle tension, blood flow, heart beating, vibration, tingling. And when I read those signals, when I'm in the presence of another person, they might be giving me some information about the feelings the other person has. And when I could kind of think about that, I could then start to process, I wasn't feeling sad before, but now that I'm around my friend, I feel this heaviness inside me, and I'm feeling a little sad too. And gee, maybe like that's telling me some information about her, right? So that's attunement. So then empathy is getting to be a little bit more cognitive. So it's like thinking about, well, gee, I see that she's sad. I wonder why. I wonder what's behind that. I wonder, what led her to feel that way and how it makes sense, right? So I'm doing a little bit more conscious thinking about the other person's experience. And then I take the step of communicating that understanding. So it's not just keeping it to myself. It's actually about saying something. And we're going to talk about different ways we can do that. All right, so I'm going to go over 4 steps of validation. And I also went through these in this video, so it's not a mistake. I actually am repeating it. Okay, so the first step is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Okay, so really imagine life from their standpoint. Given everything about that person, how do you think they're experiencing this moment? So this is about getting out of yourself and not just seeing it through your eyes, but seeing it through the other person's eyes. Okay. All right. So step 2, trying to understand their feelings and inner experiences. So how might their circumstances be leading them to feel that way? You know, what might have been some of the causes for this person based on their life? Okay. Step 3, then you start to show acceptance about what they're feeling, because maybe it all makes sense because all these things led to this moment for that person. And therefore you have to radically accept it because everything is as it should be. Everything led to this moment. And to try to certainly be non-judgmental about it. You know, when you build more understanding, it's easier to drop the judgments. When you stay on the surface, it's much easier to be judgmental. All right, then step 4 is about the communication. So once you kind of do that inner processing, you know, you try to let the person know that you're making an effort to understand them. I mean, you may not be 100% right. You could always check your understanding with the person, but, you know, kind of feeling it out and letting them know, you know, it sounds like this must be going on for you, right? Well, that must be really hard. I can see how difficult it is, right? You're kind of showing them on a deeper level that you're trying to make an effort and you're trying to get it. Okay. So validation helps us understand the outside by focusing on the inside. All right, so this is another way to think about it. So an image that I often get that I share with people is a television with static, right? So if I walk in a room and a TV's on with a lot of static, I could just say, oh, forget that. I can't watch this show. You know, look at all the static on that TV. Forget it, right? But if I was really patient, let's say I really want to watch the program. This is the only TV available and it's on there, right? Maybe I'd be a little more patient with the static, or I'd look at it more carefully and see if I could see the image of the TV show behind the static. Or maybe, you know, outside of the shh sound, I could hear a little bit of the program and I try to listen hard to hear it, right? So we could do that with other people. So instead of focusing on just the surface behaviors they exhibit, you know, which may not be that appealing to us, if we look beyond that, we could understand maybe what's going on for that person. And we could appreciate that person a little bit more and communicate that we can see that there's a good TV show under there, underneath all that static. Okay? Here's another thing we could think about. Ever have someone ask you how you're doing and you just say fine, but they know something's wrong, right? If the person senses you and they know you, sometimes they know that fine doesn't just mean fine, that behind that, there's a lot going on, you know, and someone might be able to validate you by saying, you know what, I know you said fine, but you don't look so good. You look kind of sad today. You look like you're struggling, right? So again, the validation is about looking beyond the surface. Another version, anger. Anger is commonly known as an emotion that often covers up more vulnerable emotions. So it's much easier sometimes to feel anger because it makes us get a false sense of power. It makes us feel like this false sense of being strong, whereas underneath we feel really vulnerable, you know. And if you look at the anger iceberg picture, you know, there's some common, you know, things underneath the surface that people might be feeling. So maybe I feel kind of shameful underneath, but on the surface I look really angry. Or maybe I was just rejected by somebody and I'm really hurt about it, but on the surface I'm like, oh, that jerk, right? But if someone's able to know me and think about what I'm going through and look beyond it, they might be able to validate what's really underneath the anger that I'm using as a defense mechanism and a cover-up, okay? All right, so here's another visual. I wish I could do it like concentric circles in a way. So on the outside, imagine the angry or defensive exterior, for example. And then beneath that is the vulnerability. And even beneath that, at our core, we are all in possession of a wise mind, that we're truly a higher self, a spirit, and there's, beneath it all is a wish to be loved. It's, you know, there's a inner goodness that we all have that's beneath everything. And it might be covered up by a lot of static, a lot of layers, but if you could see into that good core of somebody, that's inherently validating. There's a guy named Jack Kornfield who's a really good mindfulness teacher, and you can definitely check him out on YouTube. He has some good books. And I heard him say a quote one time, I forgot by who, and he said, you know, seeing the good in people, it always pays to see the good in people. They respond much better for it, right? So if someone sees your inner goodness behind all your, your drama, and they recognize that you're a good person beneath it all, you could feel that, and it makes a difference. It helps. So it's our job to do that for other people. And this is what they mean by when they say namaste, right? So the spirit in me sees the spirit in you, right? Or there's another phrase they say in Kundalini Yoga, Satnam, which means truth is my identity, right? So ultimately with validation, we want to peel back the layers and see that truth as the identity, to see that wise mind, okay? All right, that was pretty deep, but we'll keep going. Okay, so how does validation help? All right, so here's some things that DBT suggests about how it helps, and it does. It improves communication, right? If I'm trying to tell somebody that I could see what's really going on with them, and I could see beneath the surface, all of a sudden now we're communicating better. They feel like someone's getting them, and they might respond better to me, may be more willing to share with me because I just showed that I cared, and I'm willing to see them as a person who's going through something. So therefore, relatedly, it shows that you're listening and you're trying to understand. It builds trust and closeness, right? It's easier to feel close with somebody when that person is willing to reach out and show that they get you. And also, if you're in the middle of a conflict, validation also helps to settle things down, because we tend to get very polarized during conflict, right? It's like, I'm right and no, you're right. No, he's wrong and I'm right and this one, right? But when you reach across the aisle and you show the person you understand their point of view, or that it makes sense even if you disagree, it starts to settle things down. Because if someone's not listening to you in an argument, you tend to get more and more intense just to try to get them to listen. But once they start showing they're listening and they validate, you can calm down, right? It helps a whole lot. Okay, I found this online just today, so this is fresh. So here's another one, other ideas about how validation helps. Okay, in certain contexts, it helps you negotiate, right? So instead of me just telling you what I want, maybe I could show you, I could listen, that I'm listening to what you want too, and why what your request is makes sense, or your suggestion, and we could put our heads together and come up with a solution, right? So negotiation and collaboration, kind of similar, right? If we work together on a project rather, we both might have different ideas about it. And if I let you know that I understand why your ideas are coming out, or why you think something should be helpful, that helps us work together better, rather than me, no, I just want it my way, right? Too polarized. Helps me be creative, because validation encourages more flexible thinking. And you have to be more flexible and willing to see other points of view when you're trying to be creative. So when you exercise that muscle, you can bring that with you during your creative endeavors. Okay, and it helps you feel safe, like we were kind of hinting before. When someone understands you, it's easier to feel safe with them, and more connected. It's emotional connected here. And the last one, identifying needs, right? So if I feel validated by you and you reflect back to me what I was trying to communicate, you're reflecting that back to me helps me understand what my needs are better, right? We understand ourselves in relationship. When other people reflect us back to us, we kind of get to know ourselves better. So that's why it helps us tune into ourselves. Okay, so mindfulness, being good at mindfulness and tuning into yourself helps you understand other people, because you feel a little bit of them. But when they can do it to you, their reflection helps you understand you, right? That's not too confusing, is it? Okay, sorry, I don't mean to be talking in circles here, but anyway, hope that makes sense. Okay, so there's some myths about validation, right? So these are things that seem to come up from time to time. So we'll just address these. So validation is not necessarily agreeing with something, right? It's just showing you understand it. Like where I work in the hospital, there's always somebody that goes around who's very symptomatic and agitated and might be yelling and screaming and interrupting people and making it hard to sleep and making a lot of noise. It's very unpleasant. And I might not like or agree with that behavior, but I might be able to understand it, right? Maybe that person isn't on the right meds yet, or that person didn't learn too many coping skills yet. And that's the best he could do in this moment. So the validation helps me understand the person, but I don't really say, okay, well, good job now. Keep going, keep screaming. It's great, I love it, right? No, right? You could disagree with the outer behavior, but still understand the inner intention. All right? Okay. And all right, so the first two are kind of interrelated. The last one, validating someone is not the same thing as being nice to someone, right? So sometimes when I ask my groups for examples, people will say like, yeah, I'll validate my friends. I'm going to take her out to lunch. Well, it's being nice to somebody. And maybe while you're talking over lunch, you could show her that you understand where she's coming from, and that's validation. But just like socializing with someone or doing someone a favor or, sending them a card, that's not necessarily validation. Validation is just about the demonstration that you understand their inner world. Okay? All right. Next, who or what can you validate? Right. So you could actually validate yourself, and we'll talk more about that later. Others, obviously. You could validate relationships, the fact that maybe a relationship is important to you or to the other person, and how that's factoring in. Someone's thoughts and feelings, which is, what's usually underlying the outer behavior you're observing. Someone's behaviors. You could say why the behavior makes sense. Maybe someone's struggles, why the struggles might be a challenge for the person. Good intentions. So let's say something didn't turn out that great, but the person had good intentions. So let's say there was a little kid who wanted to surprise her mom for Mother's Day. So she cooked up some eggs and toast and orange juice, and she brought it to her mom on a tray and breakfast in bed. But, the toast was burnt and the eggs were runny, and, there are seeds in the orange juice, and she made a mess in the kitchen. But the mom understands that the kid meant to do something nice. So the mom could validate the kid's intentions by saying, oh, that was really, really nice of you to do that. I appreciate it, right? If she just looked at the outer behavior, she might totally rip the girl's heart out and be like, what are you making a big mess in my kitchen, right? So you have to understand the intention, and that makes a lot of sense for validation. You could also validate someone's effort. So maybe I just got a C on a test, which is not maybe the best grade for me, but maybe my teacher could recognize that although I got a C, it was a challenge for me and I tried really hard, right? So even if the outer product isn't perfect, you could still admire the effort somebody puts in. Okay, so there's 6 levels of validation that they talk about in DBT. So we're going to run through these so you can understand the different ways that are available to us to validate other people. So level 1 is being a good listener. So this has to do in some ways with just being present for the person, being mindful, being in the moment with the person, undistracted, and being agendaless listening, meaning I don't have an agenda of something I want to say, and I'm not interrupting necessarily, and I'm not jumping in with my opinions. I'm just kind of being there for the person listening, right? How great is that? It's simple, but it's so important. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, use reflection. You may have heard this term before. It's basically when you listen carefully to somebody, occasionally, just to show you're listening, you might reflect back or repeat a part of what they said. So in the picture example I have here, so let's say the woman on the left is talking about something she went through today. Maybe she had a rough day at school or work or their family, and and she said, oh man, I'm really having a hard day. And at some point in her conversation. And then, her friend on the right at some point reflects back, says, so you're really having a hard day, huh? Right? So she's using the same words her friend used, but she's saying it back to her. And it shows that she's listening and trying to understand. And the person who said those words originally feels more heard. Okay, so number 3, putting words to things outside the person's awareness. So this might have to do with body language and the way the person's coming across. And sometimes when you're in emotional mind, you don't even realize the signals you're putting out there. So let's say that football player is on the bench and he's kind of bummed about something that happened during the game. Maybe he screwed up and he's feeling bad about it. And the coach notices his body language, right? He's slumped over, has his head in his hands, he looks kind of sad, serious, right? So maybe the coach comes over and starts to put words to the things outside his awareness. So maybe he's like, hey, what's happening? You look really sad. What's going on? Did you have a rough game today? Are you upset about that play that you missed? Right? So he could tell from his body language if something's going on, and then he's going to comment on it. So again, going beneath the surface and articulating it. Number 4, note how the behavior makes sense given the person's history. So this might involve knowing something about the person's history. So, for example, if your friend had a rough childhood or upbringing or abuse, that might impact the way they're responding to something right now. And maybe an extreme reaction the person's having now has to do with the fact that the current situation is reminding them of a past situation. And that's fueling a more intense reaction now. So it helped me to understand that. And I could even communicate to the person if I had that kind of relationship with the person. Okay. So same thing with a past relationship. Maybe they're suffering now from a breakup because they had a past breakup. And it's even worse to them now because it happened again with a different person. So knowing that relationship history might give me some info about that. Okay. And just in general, any challenges or hardships a person might have been through in the past might impact the way they're handling stuff now. And even the fact that, the person might be struggling with some bad habits, maybe even target behaviors or an addiction. And just understanding that habits are hard to break, right? Sometimes at work, when patients get caught smoking and they get in trouble, I could empathize with them that, sometimes it's hard to quit smoking. I know you don't want to get in trouble, and you snuck one you weren't supposed to, but I understand how much you've been struggling with breaking that bad habit, right? Because you've been smoking for 20 years. Okay, so the past is influencing the present and what's going on right now. Okay, so here's an example. The girl on the right saying, your uncle's death must be so hard for you, considering how many losses you've had in your life, right? So her reaction right now, how sad and upset she might be about this current loss is fueled by a past loss. So when you put that into words, really shows the validation, the understanding. Okay, so next, note how the behavior makes sense given the current circumstances. Okay, so that might be someone's financial situation. Maybe they're struggling with money, housing or living situation. Sometimes it's hard living in a big family with a lot of people, or when there's tension in the house, for example, or some people live in a community residence with a lot of other folks, or there's drugs in the house and you don't get along with everybody. All that could influence someone's stress level and therefore their behavior. So you can understand that current behavior by tracing back. Okay. If someone's struggling with a physical or a mental illness, kind of like I said before, if a person's really mentally ill and then they're acting out, you might be able to understand their behavior just knowing that they're sick, right? A lot of patients where I work validate each other because they know, well, I don't like the way so-and-so's yelling and screaming all the time, but I understand that he's sick. That's validation. Someone's support system or lack of, right? Their current relationships affect their behavior. Someone's current life demands. They have a lot going on and they're stressed out or they're up to here with work, that affects everything. Or their coping skills or lack of. Maybe the person at my job, the patient is yelling and screaming because he never learned anger management skills. Maybe he's still early in the game and figuring that out, right? So I could validate that maybe he's just not there yet. Okay, so here's an example. So we got a woman here, super mom, so to speak, trying to get it all done, all right? So let's say that's a friend of mine. Let's say when we both were single, we used to hang out every week. We used to go out to dinner, we used to go to the movies, we used to go to the beach, but now I barely hear from her, right? Maybe my first emotional mind reaction is, what, she doesn't like me anymore? She's rejecting me? What, I'm not good enough for her? But it's not personal. What if I thought again and I started to validate her and I said, you know what? She's got a whole lot going on. She's got 2 kids, she's got work, she's got home life, she's got all kinds of stuff. She's really busy and that's why she's not calling back. I could understand that. I could understand why she can't text me that often. She's doing a whole lot of stuff. Okay, see how that works? Okay, number 6, radical genuineness. So This is when you have to say a difficult truth to somebody. Okay, so this takes a little courage. So let's say I sense that something's going wrong, like on the picture on the right. Maybe this woman's sister seems like she might be relapsing into drugs or alcohol. You know, the little signs are there based on her behavior and some other things. And there's some hesitation sometimes to confront somebody when that happens. So you would really be a courageous, a radically genuine thing to say, you know what, I'm worried about you. I think you're relapsing. You're showing signs of relapse, you know, and to just put it out there in a very genuine way. Okay. And that could be hard to do, but sometimes it's really important. You know, I know you've been drinking again, right? Maybe you should go back to AA. It's been a while, right? The important thing to remember about radical genuineness is that it's done with a kind intention. So it's not being honest in a nasty way. It's not like, oh, I'm keeping it real and I'm telling them like it is, and I'm just going to say, well, what the fuck is wrong with you, right? It's not like that, right? You're not judging the person. You're not telling it like it is in terms of throwing your judgments around. You're being honest about something that's going on that maybe the person doesn't want you to see, but it's important to call them out on it. All right. Okay. Other validation tips. Showing respect to the person, taking the person seriously. So this is like just at a deep level, seeing the person as a real human being that's equal to you as a human being, and we're relating to each other as equals. So we're not one-upping or one-downing the person or trying to talk down to them in any way. We're not trying to belittle them for going through what they're going through. You know, we're trying to just be authentic, okay? And of course, non-judgmental. And as I hinted before, showing tolerance and understanding for their behavior, even if you don't like it, okay? So all these things are really important. In some cases, it may not be appropriate to actually articulate the validation, even though part of validation is putting it into words and communicating it. But sometimes it may not be appropriate. Like if it's something going on in a public setting with somebody I don't know, I may not approach that person and validate them. Or if it's a patient at work who's very agitated, I might validate the person in my mind, understanding they're sick, but that may not be the time for me to communicate it to that person. The person may not fully get what I'm saying anyway, right? But it can help us on our own to think validating thoughts. So instead of thinking judgmental thoughts, which are just going to make you more upset about what they're doing, try to show some understanding in your mind. Try to imagine what led to that behavior for that person within yourself. And that could serve to help calm you down, help you see in a more wise mind balanced way, and perhaps react in a more effective way than you might have if you just stuck with some judgments. Okay? All right, so validating yourself, I did say before we would get to that. So here's a slide for that. So this can be hard sometimes, especially if we grew up where we weren't really validated by the people around us, or at least to the extent that we needed to be. So if it was never done to us, it could be hard to do it to ourselves. So sometimes if we are invalidated by others, we start to invalidate and judge ourselves. So we really have to practice this as a brand new skill sometimes, okay? So it takes some conscious effort. So it involves tuning into yourself, recognizing what you're going through, and then relating to that part of yourself from a higher place, maybe from your wise mind place, and offering that struggling part of yourself some validation, right? So maybe you have a suffering emotional mind part that's feeling really shameful, but your wise mind self is able to say, I get it, right? Makes sense, I understand that. And offer that part of yourself compassion and understanding. I heard another phrase that I liked from somebody, and it was, I honor your power, right? So recognizing that our emotions can be really powerful over us, and or maybe just try to communicate something to us. So instead of just telling them to go away, we're trying to accept them, validate them, and say, you know what, you do have power over me, and I recognize that, but you need to step aside and let my wise mind handle it. okay? It also can be inherently validating to remind you that you're doing the best you can. So given your history, your current circumstances, and everything else that's going on with you, skills that you know and don't know, in this moment, you're doing the best you can. And that's something that could help with the validation. All right. Next, coping with invalidation. Okay, so as much as we would like other people to validate us, no matter what, inevitably we're going to be invalidated, right? It's just going to happen. And it's probably been happening. So we need to know how to cope with it because we can't control other people. We can only control ourselves. So the first thing is to remember that it's not personal, that the fact that the person's invalidating you says more about them than it says about you. They may not have ever learned anything about validation. They might have been invalidated and only know how to invalidate people, right? So I'm validating their invalidation if you think about it. Okay. And if you're with somebody in a close friendship or a partnership, and they're invalidating you on a regular basis, and they don't change when you try to work with them on that, you might want to reevaluate the relationship. Do I still want to stay? Do I want to hang out with somebody that's constantly putting me down or showing that they don't care or they're defining me in some way? All right, so something to think about. Make friends with people that do understand you, that are capable of validation, right? Have those positive people in your life, super important. Practice validating yourself, right? So if someone invalidates you, you could still validate yourself. If you can't get it from the outside, you could give it to yourself from the inside. Right? We don't have to just wait for someone else to do it. We have the power to do it also. And finally, there might be some other DBT skills that we might need to use to cope with the invalidation, especially if it makes us upset. Sometimes we can't help but just feel bad about it. So, you might want to pull out some of those distress tolerance skills or emotion regulation skills and just help yourself get through the situation while you're reminding yourself not to take it personally and validating yourself. Okay, so that's it. That's validation. Oh, you wanted to know about validation, right? It's a whole lot. But seriously, it's a really helpful, good skill. You could use it anywhere. Use it on yourself for sure. Okay, and I hope you could reap all the benefits that validation has to offer. All right, so good luck with everything. Try it out and see you next time. Okay, bye everybody.